We have an opportunity to have safer communities if we choose to control cannabis, to regulate it, and to tax it so that those monies, California finally gets its fair share and we take those profits away from our criminal drug cartels.
In the fall of 2010, the population of California voted on Proposition 19, a bill intended to liberalize and regulate the cultivation, use, and sale of marijuana. With the outcome uncertain until the last minute, the proposition was eventually rejected.
Proposition 19 to legalize marijuana voted down in California. In fact,
46% of the population, however, voted in favor. This suggests, in the state where most of the important cultural revolutions have originated, that sooner or later the proposal will become law. In 1996, California was the first state of the Union to legalize marijuana for medicinal use. This has triggered a true economic revolution. Cultivation permits are now relatively easy to obtain.
Card is printing. I'm going to give you this. This is your cultivation certificate, sir. If you choose to grow a garden, be sure to post a copy of that in plain sight in front of your garden.
There are hundreds of thousands of California citizens who can now legally purchase marijuana by simply obtaining a medical certificate. By presenting their personal card to any of the licensed dispensaries, anyone can bring home a few ounces of their favorite smoke or a portion of edibles such as pies, ice cream, or cookies, all infused with marijuana.
You got the ice cream?
The ice cream's in a lot of
let me try to have the ice cream.
Those are all one dose apiece. And in general, the cakes and cookies here are made with more of an indica hybrid. And those go by dosage. The green label are single strength, the red are triple.
There are over 5,000 licensed dispensaries in California, and the need to supply them all has sparked a multi-million-dollar business across the state. Marijuana cultivation has literally replaced what used to be the #1 crop in California, wine. Entire rural areas, especially in the north of San Francisco, have been converted for marijuana cultivation. And those who don't own farmland make do with their own homes, turning their basements, garages, and sometimes even their entire houses into growing gardens capable of producing up to 3 or 4 crops a year. Dozens of manuals and videos freely available on the internet will teach you how to turn a simple apartment room into the most sophisticated greenhouse, complete with thermal isolation, ventilation, and irrigation systems. That includes, of course, an artificial illumination system capable of fully replacing the light of the sun. Just as much information is available on what seeds to buy, how to plant them and grow them, on temperatures and night and day cycles, on harvesting, and on everything else you need to know to make the best out of your indoor cultivation. In the meantime, California marijuana has become the most valued on the national market. It is estimated that more than half of the grass consumed in the United States today comes from the West Coast plantations. But indoor cultivation has already spread across the country. In any house of any suburb of any American city, police can now expect to find a cultivation of marijuana.
In the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've seen a great phenomenon of indoor marijuana grows, and that's all around the country.
In the meantime, the number of states considering the legalization or having already legalized marijuana continues to increase. In Oregon, for example, finding a cannabis cafe today is almost as ordinary as it is in California.
I have patients that are on stage 5 of cancer. People were expecting them to die. Their families were just ready for them to go away. But then they started using medical marijuana and their appetites came back. They left some of those pharmaceuticals that were so harsh. Many times I've gotten calls from people at the Veterans Administration Hospital here in Portland, and they couldn't medicate out of public view. They had gone through procedures for 4 to 6 hours, and because of that, they needed a place to use their medicine. They had to go to an alley. They had to go to the back seat of their car. That was unsafe. And so we created this place for them, for us, a niche where we could use our medicine out of public view and enjoy each other. We're social creatures. There's nothing wrong with that.
More and more scientific research keeps adding up, confirming the validity of therapeutic marijuana. Other studies comparing toxicity and the risk of addiction among the most popular drugs have placed marijuana last, preceded by nicotine, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, and even caffeine. More and more doctors are taking an open stand in favor of medical marijuana.
marijuana is much less dangerous than many other substances in less restrictive schedules like morphine and cocaine, not to mention the unscheduled legal mass killers, tobacco and alcohol. Of course, marijuana does have proven medical usefulness for some conditions.
As an interested physician pharmacologist, I became very much taken by the fact that cannabis was analgesic, relieved pain. It lowered the likelihood of nausea and vomiting in cancer chemotherapy. It relieved muscle cramps in people with multiple sclerosis. It increased appetite. It helped AIDS patients both in gaining weight and in treating their nausea.
Dr. Lester Greenspoon, professor emeritus at Harvard Medical School, conducted in 1967 an in-depth research on all existing scientific material on marijuana. He eventually concluded that marijuana is by no means the dangerous and devastating drug described by the propaganda.
I learned that despite my training in medicine and science, I had been brainwashed like just about every other citizen in this country.
Dr. Greenspoon has written several books on marijuana and is considered today one of the leading experts on the subject.
This absurd continuation of this prohibition is largely a function of ignorance. It turns out that marijuana came across as a remarkably non-toxic drug. People find smoking marijuana very useful for a whole host of symptoms.
But all this is systematically ignored at federal level, where the legalization of marijuana keeps being rejected without a scientific or sound basis.
Is there a better way, and some people have suggested looking into a system of legalization that might be effective in stemming the tide of drugs from Mexico and then the border wars and the immigration problems from Mexico? Have you considered this as a possibility?
I think anybody who looks at this problem considers it, and ultimately when you look at it, rejects it.
Let me ask you about the way
people, I'm sorry, but there are too many individuals, both parents and others, who have lost their lives to drugs to give a ready answer that it should be legalized.
Name me a couple of parents who've lost their lives to marijuana.
Can't.
Exactly, you can't, because that hadn't happened, and there hadn't been a wave, because that's been a constant thing in America since Harry Anslinger, because African Americans used it and saw it as something that was crippling and gave it to the Latin Americans and put an ethnic tone to it. When have we, is there some time we're going to see that we ought to prioritize meth, crack, cocaine, and heroin and deal with the drugs that the American culture is really being affected by and lives are being lost?
They don't care if marijuana is the only drug that can alleviate your pain and suffering so that you can live longer, so that you can take your chemotherapy, so that you have a reasonable quality of life. They would rather fight the war on drugs even though they know that there are sick and dying patients being denied relief because of their position. Unconscionable.
So absurd and untenable has become the government's position on marijuana that more and more people are beginning to suspect that the prohibition is not based on the presumed dangers of its chemical compounds, but on the tremendous potential that hemp has always shown in history for industrial production. Known since ancient times as the miracle plant, the sister of man, a gift from the gods, the history of cannabis is deeply linked to human history. Since the dawn of civilization, the cannabis plant has been an invaluable source for the production of textiles, paper, food, and fuel materials, in addition to providing a wide range of important medicinal remedies.
You can make paper out of it, that you can make cloth out of it, you can make cord out of it, you can make oil, you can make medicine.
You can make food out of hemp seed oil. You can burn it in a lamp. You can make rope. You can make parachute cordage and tie your shoes. And the Constitution was really printed on hemp paper.
You can make plastic from hemp, paper from hemp, wood from hemp, oil from hemp, fuel from hemp, name it.
The cannabis plant is very resistant, can grow at almost any latitude, requires no herbicides or pesticides to be cultivated, and grows faster than almost all other crops. Cannabis can produce up to 25 tons of biomass a year per cultivated acre, an extraordinary feat. The two most common species of cannabis are sativa and indica. The first one, taller and slender, has a thinner foliage and can reach up to 24 feet in height. Indica is much stockier and thicker in foliage. Also, the sativa leaves are thinner and more elongated, while those of the indica are shorter and more well-rounded. A third type of cannabis, less common, is the ruderalis, which grows mainly in the colder regions of Central Asia. The chemical compound causing the mental alterations in the smoker, called THC, is found only in the leaf and flower of cannabis. The rest of the plant can be used to derive hundreds of useful products without having to discard a single gram. The stalk of cannabis is composed of an inner, more woody and rigid part, and an outer wrapping, which is softer and fibrous in nature. From the central stem, the pulp for paper production is harvested. The oldest cannabis paper dates back to the Chinese Empire of 4000 BC. In Europe, the use of cannabis paper began in the 8th century under the Emperor Charlemagne, who strongly encouraged its cultivation. Used by monks to copy the Holy Scriptures, cannabis paper also provided the parchments for the first Bible printed by Gutenberg. The outer wrapping of the stem produces the fiber needed to make ropes and fabrics, which are universally recognized for their quality and durability. Literally millions of miles of rope of all types and sizes have been produced with cannabis fiber in the course of history.
For centuries prior to about 1850, all the ships that sailed the western seas were rigged with hempen rope and sails. A 44-gun frigate took over 60 tons of hemp for rigging, including an anchor cable 25 inches in circumference.
The range of fabrics that can be produced with the fiber of cannabis is virtually unlimited.
The beauty of the hemp fibre is that it could be many things depending on its method of cultivation and the method of processing. These can range from coarse hessians, industrial fabrics such as carpet backings, to the finest linens. With special steam treatment, the fibre can fibrillate and produce a cloth of a silky consistency, which is indistinguishable from natural silk.
Fabrics from cannabis are generally softer and stronger than cotton. They cost less, and their manufacturing, unlike cotton, produces virtually no pollution.
Hemp is undoubtedly the most durable of the natural fibres. The original Levi jeans were made from recycled sailcloth, which was made from hemp fibre, and it proved its worth under the most trying of conditions. The testing we've done over 3 years, 3 years of very hard wash and wear, don't make the slightest impression on the hemp fibre. It softens, but it doesn't weaken.
The seeds of cannabis can be used as a food base, ground into a high-protein flour, or used to produce an excellent edible oil, rich in protein, carbohydrates, and essential fatty acids, such as omega-3 and omega-6.
Hemp seed oil is unique in having such a high proportion of the omega-3 unsaturated fatty acids, with a very strong cardioprotective effect. It has a near complete balance of essential amino acids, second only to soybean.
The oil of cannabis may also provide a superior fuel for illumination and domestic heating, or it can be used as fuel for cars in the form of ethanol.
As you can see, there is no smoke emitting from this in this room. Try this with a tablespoon or 2 of gasoline, and you will have the comparative test. Also, when your engine is through burning on gasoline, take it apart and see how much dirty carbon you find in the engine. We found that running a car 3,500 miles, we couldn't even get a white glove dirty when we took our finger inside of the exhaust pipe.
In 1941, the manufacturer Henry Ford designed an automobile that was built almost entirely with vegetable products, especially cannabis and its derivatives. The engine was already using a blend of 10% ethanol, while the body was made up of a special biodegradable plastic, much lighter but significantly stronger than a normal metallic body. In fact, there are at least 5,000 items that can be produced with cannabis. Amongst these are crackers, animal cages, insulation materials, textile fibers, guitar cases, sheets, rollers for massage, mascara, napkins, oatmeal, mattresses, footwear, t-shirts, shoelaces, earmuffs, diapers, baby pacifiers, pillows, hammocks, speaker boxes, shower curtains, chairs, deodorants, blankets, drums, coffee filters, clogs, sawdust for the stalls, curtains, hats, boots, ironing boards, underwear, towels, gloves, candles, surfboards, and even houses can be built in large part with cannabis products. Despite this, the production of cannabis is currently banned practically everywhere in the world. The problems for cannabis began in the 1930s. In the wake of the Industrial Revolution, a new movement in America was born. It was called Chemergy, and it listed the very Henry Ford among its founders. Instead of abandoning agriculture to itself and directing all the investments toward the industry, this movement sought to transform and harness the agricultural output in order to integrate it into industrial production. The idea was to use agricultural products, mainly cannabis, to provide the industry with all the raw materials it needed. But there was a major handicap in making the production of cannabis truly competitive. The separation of the fiber from the stalk still needed to be done by hand, and this slowed down the production while greatly increasing the cost. But the invention of a new machine, the decorticator, seemed to remove the last barrier for cannabis, finally promising unlimited success. At that time, the magazine Popular Mechanics published a landmark article entitled New Billion-Dollar Crop, in which it envisioned a tremendous revival of cannabis plantations all around the world. But not everyone seemed to be happy with the future success of this miracle plant. At that time, the magnate of pink journalism, William Randolph Hearst, had bought millions of acres of timber forests, which he intended to use to make paper for his ever more popular tabloid publications. With the return of hemp paper, far less expensive than tree paper, his empire was doomed to collapse in a short period of time. Another industry giant who was directly threatened by the return of cannabis was Lamont DuPont, the owner of the petrochemical company that had just bought the patents to create dozens of synthetic products from oil. Nylon stockings, brushes, men's clothing, and even tires for your car. And then Orlon, Dacron, synthetic sponges, cellophane, and a full range of products that would have been easily displaced on the market by their competitors made with hemp. Apart from the risk of losing millions of dollars, Hearst and DuPont had something else in common. They were both funded by one of the most powerful bankers of the time, Andrew Mellon. Andrew Mellon was also the owner of Gulf Oil, one of the so-called Seven Sisters. At that time, oil companies were expanding at great speed, but were likely to see their investments vanish by the mass production of cannabis, which offered a much cleaner and more economical fuel. Nor should we forget the young pharmaceutical industry, which was financed by two other powerful bankers, John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. These people were conducting an all-out campaign to eliminate the accepted natural herbal treatments, including cannabis, from the pharmacopoeia, while trying to replace them with drugs created in the laboratory. Furthermore, Rockefeller was also the owner of Standard Oil, which had already started to invade America with its refineries and its service stations. Thus was born this natural alliance between the synthetic textile industry, the oil industry, the producers of plastics and its derivatives, and the pharmaceutical industry. They all needed to get rid of the common enemy as soon as possible. Luckily for all, at that time, Andrew Mellon was also the Secretary of the Treasury. From that powerful position, he appointed his future son-in-law, Harry Anslinger, to be the head of the new Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Harry Anslinger had already had experience as a federal agent during Prohibition. His job was now to transform the crumbling bureaucracy of Prohibition, which in the meantime had been abolished, into a new weapon to combat and eradicate cannabis from the future of the nation.
The Treasury Department intends to pursue a relentless warfare against the despicable, dope-peddling vulture who preys on the weakness of his fellow man.
One, however, could not openly attack cannabis, which was a plant loved and respected by the vast majority. Hearst then had the brilliant idea to use the Mexican nickname marijuana, which was totally unknown to Americans at the time. In doing so, on one hand, he managed to divert the suspicions of the true objectives of the operation. On the other, by attaching the use of marijuana to blacks and Mexicans, it made it much easier to ride the growing wave of racism that was already sweeping across the country at the time. Adding fuel to the fire, Anslinger declared that marijuana is mostly used by Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with the Negroes, entertainers, and any others. The backlash was immediate, and soon a new green monster was born. The market was flooded with publications of all kinds in which marijuana, also known as reefer, became synonymous with sin, moral depravity, violence, recklessness, and even murder. From the most popular tabloids to adventure books, from comic strips to sophisticated magazines such as Cosmopolitan, all owned by Randolph Hearst, there was hardly a publication that didn't jump on the bandwagon of demonizing marijuana. Now that Puritan America had found its enemy, Anslinger felt it was time to extend the fear of contagion to the entire population.
America is threatened by a new drug menace. Street corner vendors whose stock in trade is the deadly loco weed marijuana pass it out in cigarette form. From ingeniously concealed containers, the reefers go to the waiting hands of deluded youngsters.
Marijuana, the dried leaves and flowers of the Indian hemp weed, is used in the form of a cigarette. Marijuana smoking, experts point out, can make a helpless addict of its victim within weeks, causing physical and moral ruin and death.
Yes, let's go, Jack. I'm red hot.
That every reefer is loaded with immorality and bestial perversions, brutality, murder, sex crimes, insanity, or suicide.
Should you ever be confronted with the temptation of taking that first puff of a marijuana cigarette, don't do it.
At the end of this devastatingly effective media campaign, a bill was introduced in Congress that in fact prohibited the cultivation and use of marijuana. Even though its psychotropic compounds are found only in the flower and leaf of cannabis, Anslinger was able to have the entire cultivation of the plant prohibited all across the country. Most of the representatives and senators who voted on the bill, in fact, didn't even know that cannabis and marijuana were the same thing.
At that time, congressmen voting on this piece of legislation were not aware that marijuana was hemp. Cannabis hemp that country had been using profitably for centuries.
Without public debate and without the support of scientific research, in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was approved by President Roosevelt.
Ladies crave the country's rave.
The war on cannabis had officially begun. There were dozens of glamorous arrests, which the same Hearst immediately made known to the entire nation.
All the jive is gone.
But not everyone believed in the demonic dangers of marijuana. The popular mayor of New York City, Fiorello LaGuardia, commissioned a scientific investigation to ascertain the real effects of marijuana on the user. 31 independent scientists worked for over 5 years, completing what became the first known scientific study on the use of marijuana. Published in 1944, the LaGuardia report showed surprising results. Marijuana, it said, does not cause aggressive or antisocial behavior, does not cause an increase in sexual depravity, does not alter the fundamental aspects of personality. Furious, Anslinger immediately resorted to the press to discredit the research, then unleashed his agents all over the country with the task of destroying every copy of the report they could find. Still not satisfied, Anslinger steered the media propaganda so that the casual smoker of marijuana became associated with the users of hard drugs such as heroin, cocaine, or morphine.
It is a symbol of narcotic addiction, is poisoning the blood of our country. But it occurs when the addict is deprived of his narcotic. He is experiencing withdrawal symptoms. He lives from fix to fix. The addict must have his drug, and to get it he must have money, and that much money comes hard. Marijuana is also smoked. Marijuana is the most prevalent narcotic among juveniles. Its greatest danger lies in the fact that it is a stepping stone to the harder drugs, such as morphine and heroin. 95% of narcotic addicts begin with the use of marijuana.
Based on this myth, which has never been confirmed by scientific research, the marijuana user was equated with the figure of the pathetic drug addict, the social reject, the loser who no longer had a chance of recovery. Building on this misinformation campaign, Anslinger convinced Congress to enact new laws which provided that the smoker of marijuana would suffer the same penalties as that of hard drug users such as cocaine or heroin. In 1956, the first arrest for possession of marijuana carried a mandatory sentence of 2 to 10 years in prison. In some states like Missouri, a second arrest for marijuana possession could be punished with life behind bars. Now that America was under control, Anslinger turned his attention to the rest of the world, where cannabis was still being cultivated freely. At the United Nations, Anslinger began knitting a Machiavellian web of diplomacy based on the growing power the United States could now exert over other nations. In 1961, Anslinger culminated his career by persuading the UN to unify all single existing treaties on drug control. Thus was born the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, to which more than 150 countries adhered. The convention established an international tribunal for the control of drugs and committed individual states, among other things, to combat and eradicate as soon as possible the cultivation of cannabis. Within a few years, the production of cannabis would become illegal virtually everywhere in the world. The petrochemical industry had won its battle, while the world received in exchange the huge ecological disaster we are witnessing today: air pollution, the contamination of aquifers, rivers, and the seabed, wild deforestation, extinction of animal species, global warming, and most importantly, our slavery to oil, which could be erased at any time by simply going back to cannabis as the basis for all fuel production.
100 years ago, the farmer produced all of the fiber, all of the medicine, all of the fuel, and all of the food that the society consumed. That's what farming is you raise those four basic categories: fiber, food, medicine, and fuel, and you sell them in the cities. They're the basic necessities of life. The money flows out of the cities back to the landowner and to the producer, where land is the means of production of wealth. It's been that way for thousands of years. Today, 100 years later, the farmer doesn't produce any fiber. If they do, it's cotton, which accounts for 50% of the pesticides and herbicides used in the agricultural sector. The farmer doesn't raise any medicine. It's all been monopolized by the pharmaceutical companies. The farmer doesn't raise any fuel. It's all been monopolized by the petrochemical companies. And if you go into a grocery store and look at the ingredients on the package, you'll find out how rapidly the farmer is being displaced from their heritage of food production. It's all been taken over by the synthetic manufacturers who, in producing these synthetic products, create the toxic waste and the hazardous byproducts with which we're having such a tough time dealing. And not only that, it concentrates wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer people all the time, because the means of production of wealth is no longer the land. It is now the factories and the shareholders and the people who own the controlling interest in those corporations.
But there are other reasons not to smoke marijuana.
The irony is that the United States used the fact of having imposed on the rest of the world the severe prohibition on cannabis to justify its increasingly harsh laws at home against its own marijuana users.
Nearly every country in the world, including the United States, is a signatory to an international law banning the use, sale, cultivation, and possession of dangerous drugs such as heroin and marijuana.
Despite this prohibition, however, the number of marijuana smokers kept growing, especially among the young. With the hippie revolution, towards the end of the 1960s, marijuana came into the open, and the joint became the symbol of social rebellion and an affirmation of individual rights. Confused, people wanted to know more. Faced with masses of youth who preached only peace and love, it was becoming more and more difficult to see the awful, bloodthirsty criminals described in the simple-minded propaganda of earlier decades. New scientific research was undertaken in Palo Alto, California to better clarify the actual effects of marijuana on the individual. The conclusions were anything but terrifying.
Well, Bill, it's been about 2 hours since you got the drug. How do you feel?
Fantastic. Defiant? Not at all. Business-like? Not at all. Sheesh. Friendly? Extreme.
Would you be interested in taking part in a study like this again and having the same type of drug?
Sure.
You would. It's been a very pleasant experience for you.
I'll do it anytime you want.
We don't smoke marijuana.
In the meantime, Vietnam soldiers were discovering marijuana.
Well, it's a 12-gauge shotgun. What we basically use it for on the LZ and I guess even out in the field, so if you want to know, is that we use the shotgun. Paul, let me borrow that bowl from you. This is probably all SIDS and we're getting busted, but I don't care.
And here, too, it became clear that cannabis did not increase one's aggressiveness. Quite the contrary.
You get really stoned. Then, you know, who cares about the war? This war.
Many Hollywood stars also began to openly support the legalization of marijuana.
Have you smoked pot?
Oh, sure. 2 martinis will knock me flat. Pot, I just sort of sit around, you know. Imagine it's a big subject. Of course, marijuana, in my opinion, should be legalized. First of all, you'd have wall-to-wall prisons if you really meant that everybody who smoked it had to go to jail. So, I mean, how can you possibly enforce the law, for God's sake?
Yeah.
You'd be trampling over bodies to get to the next cigarette.
This sudden wave of freedom deeply worried the right-wing conservatives.
I think this is the time and this is the place to take off the gloves and sock it to them.
In 1968, Richard Nixon ran and won on the promise of restoring tranquility and moral order in a country torn apart by social revolution. Among the first things he had to face was the large popular movement asking for the decriminalization of marijuana. To buy time, Nixon ordered a new commission to study the effects of marijuana on the individual.
I wonder if you could give us some of your thoughts on it.
Well, that's for your point. As you know, there is a commission that is supposed to make recommendations to me about this subject.
But once again, the results were quite opposite to what he expected.
The recommendation of the Commission in its first report is that we do not feel that private use or private possession in one's own home should have the stigma of criminalization, that people who experiment should not be criminalized for that particular behavior.
Richard Bonney was co-chair of that commission.
It became apparent how little was really known about the effects of this drug and how little evidence there was to support the claims about its dangers.
When Nixon was informed of the results, he trashed the report without even reading it. He then went on television to let the country know that the draconian laws on marijuana would not change.
I shall continue to oppose efforts to legalize marijuana.
Then Nixon had a law on controlled substances approved, which placed marijuana in so-called Schedule I, together with more heavy and dangerous drugs like heroin and morphine, which have, quote, no medical use.
The federal government, by classifying marijuana in Schedule I, is saying that it has no medical uses, which is a bald-faced lie because it has 10,000 years in every culture of medical use.
DEA Administrative Judge Francis Young ordered a study on the therapeutic validity of marijuana and concluded that its placing in Schedule I was unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious.
He came up with a 60-odd page opinion saying marijuana is probably the safest drug in the pharmacopoeia, and it certainly has medical utility, and it should be moved to Schedule II.
At around the same time, England ordered a similar study by Baroness Wootton, a well-known sociologist and criminologist who had collaborated with the British government before. The results were similar to those of the Nixon Commission. The long-term consumption of cannabis in moderate doses, said the report, has no harmful effects. There is no evidence that this activity is causing violent crime or aggression, antisocial behavior, or is producing in otherwise normal people conditions of dependence or psychosis requiring medical treatment. The study concluded that Possession of a small amount of cannabis should not normally be regarded as a serious crime to be punished by imprisonment. But there was nothing that could apparently change Nixon's mind. In fact, to better implement his new laws, Nixon created the powerful DEA, the federal agency tasked with fighting the traffic and use of drugs all over the nation. Thanks to their special status, DEA agents could spy on private citizens and could break into their houses without a warrant. Thus, the DEA became also a tool to control blacks and other minorities and all those who had political positions disliked by the White House. But the spread of marijuana appeared to be unstoppable, and towards the mid-70s it had already reached the first strata of American suburbia. Now the user was not only the dropout hippie, the penniless artist, or the long-haired student, but also the corporate lawyer, the bank manager, or the grandmother of that student.
I've spent a lot of time with my daughter and her friends, and they all smoked marijuana, and so I had to try it.
Passionate activist groups were being born all across America, demanding the decriminalization of marijuana.
We don't want any penalty for the private possession and use and cultivation of marijuana.
In the first of its kind, Oregon State in 1973 challenged the federal law and proceeded to decriminalize the personal use of marijuana. 10 more states would follow within a few years. In the meantime, Richard Nixon, defeated by his own moral issues, retired from the stage. In a twist of direction that seemed to better reflect the changes in society, Democrat Jimmy Carter, elected in 1976, took an open stand in favor of decriminalization.
President Carter proposes major changes to federal drug laws.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana, leaving the states free to adopt whatever laws they wish concerning marijuana.
But in the short 4 years he had in office, he was able to get very little done. The return to the White House of the Republicans with Ronald Reagan meant a new tightening in the war on marijuana.
Leading medical researchers are coming to the conclusion that marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug in the United States, and we haven't begun to find out all of the ill effects, but they are permanent ill effects.
No one, however, has ever been able to find those alleged studies which would show devastating effects on the marijuana user.
Pharmaceutical companies are very threatened by the idea of people having direct access to substances that really work. And so there is a lot of effort to scare people away from natural medicines by telling them that they're dangerous, that things out of nature are more dangerous for you than the products of pharmaceutical companies.
With the full support of the White House, the DEA now had available the most modern technology for controlling and terrorizing its citizens. It soon became a feared apparatus of state repression. Thousands of young Americans ended up in prison every day just for possession of a single reefer. Innocent young people saw their personal records stained forever for a simple arrest.
Read my lips.
The presidency of George H. Bush, former CIA director and Reagan's successor, made the repressive measures against marijuana users even tougher.
Our nation has zero tolerance for casual drug use. If you do drugs, you will be caught. And when you're caught, you will be punished. Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room. The rules have changed.
Once the Democratic Bill Clinton was elected, everyone expected a softening stance on the repression of marijuana users and a return to a more balanced position. To everyone's surprise, Clinton instead relaunched the war on drugs on a global scale.
Drugs are every nation's problem, and every nation must act to fight them. We are determined to build the drug-free America and to join with others to combat drugs around the world.
In the meantime, his Secretary of Justice, Janet Reno, went as far as to openly threaten doctors who wished to prescribe marijuana for medical use.
We want to make clear that federal law still applies, and federal officials will continue to apply the law, and DEA officials will review cases, as they have, to determine whether to revoke the registration of any physician who recommends or prescribes so-called Schedule I controlled substances.
While systematically ignoring the results of all the new medical studies, Clinton officials kept propagating the false information, which has never found support in scientific studies on the alleged dangers of marijuana.
All available research has concluded that marijuana is dangerous to our health.
By the end of his mandate, Clinton had become the president who spent more than anyone else in the history of the United States to fight the war on drugs. With the presidency of George W. Bush, the situation remained pretty much the same, and only the election of Barack Obama seemed to bring in a new sense of change.
Federal law, of course, still considers it a controlled substance, and there have been attempts from Washington to punish doctors.
Yeah, I mean, I would not punish doctors if it's prescribed in a way that is appropriate. That may require some changes in federal law. I will tell you that what I'm not going to be doing is using Justice Department resources to try to circumvent state laws on this issue, simply because I want folks to be investigating violent crimes and potential terrorism. We've got a lot of things for our law enforcement officers to deal with.
But when in 2010 California was about to vote on Proposition 19, the song from Washington regressed back to its old tune.
Top prosecutor is now reminding folks that pot will still be illegal under federal law. The Attorney General Eric Holder warns the U.S. government will continue to enforce the law even if voters in California pass Prop 19.
Proposition 19 did not pass. Therefore, the conflict between the federal and state laws remains at this point unresolved. Quite different is the attitude by some European countries, where the law enforcement has instead concentrated on cutting down illegal drug trafficking, while the user is no longer treated as a criminal. The most famous example is certainly the Netherlands, where personal possession and consumption of marijuana has been decriminalized for many years. Contrary to what many feared, marijuana use has not increased significantly in this country, while the number of crimes connected to illegal drugs has declined drastically. In Amsterdam today, any adult can walk into one of the so-called coffee shops and purchase a limited quantity of grass for personal use without having to fear being arrested. Millions of dollars are saved by not having to continuously send to prison thousands of individual users, while the same money can be used to pursue much more efficiently the criminal trafficking of heavier and more dangerous drugs, such as cocaine and heroin. But the most advanced and possibly shocking example comes from Portugal, which in 2001 chose to decriminalize the possession and use of all kinds of drugs, from marijuana to heroin, from cocaine to amphetamines.
8 years ago in Portugal, the law was changed so that possessing or using any illicit drug was no longer a crime. At the time, there were warnings the policy would be disastrous and that the country would become a European haven for drugs tourism.
But what one politician at the time called the promise of sun, beaches and any drug you like simply didn't materialise. In fact, since decriminalisation, the consumption of drugs here in Portugal has gone down.
The Portuguese drug squad stresses they're not going soft on the traffickers. Seizures have more than doubled since 1995. Police say earlier fears that Portugal would be awash with drugs following decriminalisation have proved unfounded.
We felt, and the Portuguese police forces were worried, that there would be an increase in consumption after its decriminalisation. This did not happen.
Local police believe things are getting better.
If we were to hang around here for a while, we would see some drug taking, but not as much as a year ago.
When users are caught, they receive a summons from the police ordering them to attend a special drugs commission run by the health service. Nothing to do with the court system at all. From there, they're offered treatment and support.
We try to dissuade people to do drugs. We don't forbid them, but we try to inform them about the risks that they are taking while they are doing drugs.
The idea that users need care, not punishment, has swept across Europe. 10 countries in the EU generally don't pursue possession as a crime.
Portugal's current Prime Minister was one of the chief architects of the policy change and says what his country has done can be exported internationally.
Julgo que esta estratégia funciona em todos os países.
I think the strategy can work in any country. You just need to rid yourselves of prejudice and take an intelligent approach.
Many countries are currently considering some sort of decriminalization, and the situation remains fluid throughout the world. But the factor that has the highest potential to radically change the future of cannabis is certainly the enormous progress made in the scientific circles on marijuana's medical properties. The fact that marijuana is an effective treatment for hundreds of different diseases has been known for centuries. It is often considered a miracle drug, but now we are beginning to understand why. The medicinal qualities of cannabis have been known since ancient times. Emperor Shen Nun, the founder of Chinese medicine, prescribed marijuana for rheumatism and malaria. His soldiers used cannabis leaves to heal their wounds because of its antibacterial properties. In the Indian subcontinent, cannabis has always been used in Ayurvedic medicine for epilepsy, gastritis, anorexia, bronchitis, leprosy, spleen problems, diabetes, and asthma. In the beginning of the 19th century, doctors returning from Asia imported the use of medical cannabis to the West, where they used it to alleviate the symptoms of typhus, tetanus, and other infections. Queen Victoria regularly used marijuana to alleviate her menstrual pains. Her personal physician declared that, managed properly, cannabis is one of the most valuable medicines. At the end of the 19th century, over 30% of drugs available in America contained cannabis. Cannabis was regularly prescribed by doctors and was part of their traditional medicine bag. The therapeutic qualities of cannabis are almost as numerous as the countless products that can be extracted from the plant. Prevention of nausea and vomiting caused by chemotherapy, anorexia, pain caused by tumors, damages to the spinal column, glaucoma, muscular weakness, to name but a few. How is it possible, one may ask, that one single plant can offer such a wide variety of therapeutic remedies? It all began in 1964 with the discovery of THC, the chemical compound that produces the mental alterations in the marijuana smoker.
These substances in the cannabis plant which are active are kind of fatty-like, lipid-like, and they're hard to work with. So it has been very hard for chemists to get a handle on these kind of substances. Therefore, it took until 1964 for Raphael Mechoulam and his colleague Adri to discover the active compound in the cannabis plant, which they called then delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or as we know it, THC.
The compound that we isolated, 1964, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, has been looked into in great depth. And indeed, for the next 20 years, people got to know a lot about the chemistry, a lot about the clinical effects, a lot about the biochemistry of THC. One thing was still unknown 20 years later. I mean, I'm speaking now of 1964 till the mid-80s. Nothing was known about the mechanism. How does THC act in the body?
Initially, it was believed that THC behaved like a regular analgesic, which interacts with the membranes of the human cell. But later, it was discovered that THC binds to specific kinds of receptors, called CB1 and CB2, which are most abundant in the brain and spinal medulla.
The receptors are highlighted in what color?
In bright red. Well, any color that you see, there are receptors. And red is the really dense areas. And you can see there's a lot of red and yellow. Green and blue are the really not dense areas where there are not many receptors in our brain.
So they really are everywhere?
Yes, yes. Yeah. In fact, they're the densest receptors, one of the densest receptors in the brain, most populated throughout the entire brain.
Once these receptors were discovered, scientists came to the conclusion that the human body must already produce something similar to THC on its own.
Now, receptors are not built in our brain or anywhere in our body, of course, or animal bodies, because there is a plant out there that will produce a compound that acts on them. That just doesn't work that way. Receptors are found in our body because we produce compound that will activate those receptors. So obviously we thought that there should be endogenous compounds which act on those receptors. The fact that there is a plant compound, the tetrahydrocannabinol, the THC, which acts on those receptors, is just a quirk of nature.
Later, scientists discovered that besides THC, there was a whole host of chemical compounds created inside the human body, which are almost identical to those produced by the cannabis plant. Because of their similarity, they were christened endocannabinoids. The endocannabinoid system, or ECS, modulates energy intake as well as nutrient transport, metabolism, and storage. Endocannabinoids also control a variety of functions in the nervous system, heart, reproductive, and immune systems. Essentially, endocannabinoid messengers help our cells communicate with one another. In all animals, the nervous system works basically in the same way. Large numbers of nerve cells carry electrical signals, and wherever the cells meet, these signals are passed to a receptor in the next cell by a chemical messenger called a neurotransmitter. Inside the brain, there are different types of neurotransmitters, including dopamine and serotonin. All animals, from mice to whales, from monkeys to humans, share this basic structure. Recent scientific discoveries date the appearance of endocannabinoids in the evolutionary cycle as far back as the time of the first primitive invertebrates.
What happened was the nervous system acquired a new chemical, if you like, that had a new flavor, a new type of chemical, and it's this chemical that is related in structure, has a similar shape to the chemical that's found in cannabis.
It is now accepted in scientific circles that our endocannabinoid system represents something absolutely unique and wonderful within our organism.
My good Italian friend Di Maso summarized the activity, which is really a summary, says, well, what do the endocannabinoids do? They relax, help us eat, sleep, forget, and protect. Not remember, forget. And don't think that forgetting is less important than recalling. We should have a system to forget. Otherwise, well, if you wish, we can burst. If you go down a mall and see 1,000 faces, do you want to remember all of them? Of course not.
Dr. Meshulam was the first to investigate this intriguing similarity between the endocannabinoids produced in our body and those produced by cannabis plant.
Problems we have been investigating for many years is the cannabis plant, as well as materials present in our body, in the body of animals, that whose action is completely parallel to the action found with the compounds in the plant.
Thanks to this research, it was finally possible to understand why cannabinoid compounds offer such a wide array of therapeutic remedies for the human animal and other life forms. Thanks to their amazing similarity, marijuana's natural cannabinoids can offer a perfect replacement mechanism when there is a weakening in our internal endocannabinoid system. It's as if a soccer coach had an exact duplicate of the official team available, with which to replace an exhausted defense player with an identical defense player, a worn-out attack player with an identical attack player, an injured goalie with an identical goalie.
It's quite an amazing spectrum of compounds that are in that plant. And what's so unique and incredible about them is they are touching on this incredible system that pervades all of us and regulates everything from, I like to tell people, cradle to grave, because it's in mother's milk.
As long as mankind lived in harmony with nature, the endocannabinoids produced in our bodies did an efficient job as tumor regulators, free radical scavengers, and anti-inflammatory agents. But once we entered the industrial age, we were inundated with an avalanche of poisonous compounds, from food additives to air pollution, from chemical fertilizers to cancer-causing pesticides, from electromagnetic pollution to the toxic drugs produced by the pharmaceutical industry. Under such stress, the endocannabinoids, which were there to keep us healthy, became overwhelmed, while we registered an explosion in such diseases as asthma, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and such deadly diseases as cancer.
What our cannabinoid system is evolved to do over many hundreds of millions of years has been to protect us from those kinds of imbalances, to restore the kind of health that we need. And because of our environment in particular, and because we are living longer, we need to be able to adapt very rapidly today. And we can't do that on an evolutionary scale. The way for us to do that as people, as intelligent people, is to make sure we're eating good diets, stay away from toxins, and eat these essential fatty acids, and when necessary, consume cannabinoids.
When marijuana is consumed, our body breaks down the THC and other cannabinoids, which immediately seek out and bind to the endocannabinoid receptors already inside us. This is why marijuana's cannabinoid chemicals can be of tremendous help to our system in fighting a diverse array of illnesses.
When an MS patient, as a matter of fact, anybody who smokes cannabis, at least one of the compounds present in cannabis, tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the active compound in cannabis, goes into the brain, goes into to the nerve cells, and binds to the receptor, to the cannabinoid receptor. And then the cannabinoid receptor starts a series of reactions which reduce some of the symptoms of the multiple sclerosis.
I can cook again, I can cut meat again. Lots of little things I can do again.
Cannabis contains 421 chemicals, more than 60 of which are cannabinoids. Among them, 4 are considered of most interest to scientists today. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, is found in the oily trichomes of the flower of the plant.
If you look in the microscope there, you'll see sort of some glistening golf ball-like structures. And those are the glandular trichomes in the inflorescence of the plant.
THC is the principal psychoactive ingredient that creates euphoria in the smoker.
What does it feel like? It looks very enjoyable.
My God, it's fun. It was amazing. Amazing.
THC is not the only cannabinoid that can influence our state of mind. Cannabidiol, also known as CBD, is a non-psychoactive compound of cannabis that gives the sedative effect to the high experienced. Among its numerous functions, CBD has been shown to have an anti-inflammatory and analgesic effect. It helps fight diabetes, bacterial infection, and malignant tumors. This compound is also a nerve protectant and has well-documented antipsychotic and anxiety-reducing effects.
There's quite a lot of CBD in that particular one as well, cannabidiol, which is another cannabinoid, a non-psychoactive cannabinoid. We're fascinated by this stuff, which has tremendous potential as an anti-inflammatory,
yes,
but also, rather surprisingly, as an antipsychotic.
So, hold on, you're telling me that CBD could be a treatment for psychosis?
Isn't that ironic? With all the sort of tremendous publicity around the link with cannabis smoking and the potential of increasing the risk of psychosis, here we have a component of the plant which itself is antipsychotic.
I like smoking marijuana. It calms me down. I just feel totally at ease. Everybody knows me. Smoke a little marijuana, Tom, you'll be great. Everything's gonna be fine, Corporate world made me stressed. Extremely stressed. Totally stressed. I am so happy I'm out of the corporate.
Tetrahydrocannabivarin, or THCV, has been found in significant amounts, mostly in South African and some Thai strains of grass. High concentrations of THCV will make the high come on quicker, but last for less time. This chemical compound may eventually prove to be a useful treatment for type 2 diabetes. The THCV has been shown to have protective, preventative effects against malignant tumors. Cannabichromine, or CBC, is a low-level cannabinoid. Though little research has been done, scientists believe CBC may have an antidepressant effect, as well as the ability to reduce inflammation. CBC strongly inhibits tumor growth in leukemia and breast cancer. It is, in fact, in the fight against cancer that marijuana is proving to be a most powerful and unexpected ally.
Breast cancer kills more than 41,000 American women every year. Researchers in the San Francisco lab are working to shrink that number, and they're doing it with an unusual weapon, marijuana, or at least a compound from it.
What we found is that this compound called cannabidiol
was particularly effective at inhibiting aggressive breast cancers.
The benefits may not stop there. Scientists say the cannabis compound may fight other aggressive cancers, including prostate cancer. The next step, animal studies, then clinical trials. So it may be several years before patients may benefit from a cannabis cancer fighter.
Among the first to promote the validity of marijuana's anti-cancer effects was Rick Simpson, a farmer who lives on the east coast of Canada.
My name is Rick Simpson. I live at 344 Little Forks Road, just outside of Macan, Nova Scotia. I'm here to tell you about the most medicinal plant known to man, hemp. Oils made from the hemp plant are the most medicinally active substances ever found in nature. When you examine bud from the hemp plant, you can see that it is covered in resin. This resin makes the bud appear to be covered in frost. This resin is the medicine.
For many years, Rick Simpson has been producing a specially made, highly concentrated oil from the cannabis plant. He makes this oil himself in his own backyard.
When collected and processed properly, the resulting oil is an effective cure or control for practically any disease known to man, even cancer. We have supplied this oil to dozens of people with cancer. Even people who were diagnosed with terminal cancer by our medical system now have a clean bill of health after treatment with hemp medicine.
One of the testaments to hemp oil's healing power is his father, a military veteran suffering from lung cancer.
And this last time I was in, I didn't know it, but they said I was going to die in 24 hours, but I didn't. So I took the oil and everything worked out right.
Well, I had skin cancer, melanoma cancer, they told me. I was treated time after time, and I was burnt several times. I call it burnt. They have another name for it, but anyway, they burnt me several times, and it wasn't doing no good. All the salve they gave me, I put it on and put it on. So I ran across this fellow they called Ricky Simpson. Well, you see my face, I know it's all wrinkled up, but there's no big holes in it.
I had 2 months to live. I was cashing in, I didn't care then, and got a hold of Rick, and Rick explained how this stuff works. The chemo and the radiation just kills everything inside of you. It doesn't give you a chance to live. And then when I look at my hemp oil, that's why I am sitting here today telling you that hemp oil does work.
Recent research at the University of California has finally dispelled the myth that marijuana increases your risk of getting cancer. In fact, it proved the contrary.
Dr. Donald Tashkin is a very good researcher at UCLA. He is a pulmonologist. His research demonstrated that the incidence of lung cancer in people who smoked cannabis was less than the incidence of lung cancer in people who smoked nothing at all.
We actually succeeded in studying about 600 lung cancer cases, about 600 head and neck cancer cases, and the bottom line is we failed to find any positive association between marijuana, even heavy marijuana use. We could not see an association. So I think it's really essentially a negative study. We failed to find any positive association with cancer.
In the last 10 years, a number of highly regarded doctors and scientists from both Europe and the United States have been publishing extremely encouraging data on the anti-cancer qualities of cannabinoids.
In a scholarly cancer review article published in 2009, there were over 421 chemical compounds identified in the cannabis plant. And within this group of natural substances, there are many chemicals that have significant anti-tumor properties at low enough doses to where they would be effective cancer treatments. That's an important part of this. It's one thing to be able to kill a cancer cell, but could you really survive such a treatment?
A botanist from the University of Colorado Springs branch, Robert Melamede, who has written an article sort of comparing the carcinogenic effect of cannabis with tobacco and explaining why he thinks that cannabis has the anti-cancer effect for lung cancer.
There's nothing else that impacts on so many of our illnesses. You see, when I talk about these age-related illnesses, We're all aging, but we don't all come down with cardiovascular disease. We don't all come down with autoimmune disease. We don't all come down with cognitive dysfunction. We don't all come down with cancer. But the chances are we're going to come down with one of them. All right? And here we have this one drug that's able to help us holistically with our biochemistry to restore balance. You know, cannabinoids kill cancer cells in many cases. People are not aware of that. They think cancer, cannabis, anti-nausea. It's way beyond that.
There are also studies taking a look at other organ systems that have found that marijuana seeks out the cancerous cells and preferentially kills them over the healthy cells.
There's a wealth of laboratory evidence that these anti-tumor properties kill cancer cells in a variety of ways. There are multiple mechanisms of action identified by which cannabis kills cancer cells, and they're divided into various categories. And among these are anti-proliferative effects. Normally, that's one of the hallmarks of a cancer cell, is that it just keeps reproducing. So if you stop the reproduction, that's an anti-proliferative effect. There are anti-angiogenesis effects, and this means that the cannabinoids will stop the tumor from being able to elaborate or grow new blood vessels to support the growth of the tumor. There are anti-metastatic effects, and that is simple enough to mean that the cannabinoids block the ability of the cancer cells to spread into other tissues. And there's another effect that has a wild name, apoptotic effect. Apoptosis refers to the ability of cannabinoids to speed the death of the abnormal cells. And that's something that is especially important in cancer, because you're able to hasten the death of the cell without disturbing the normal cells around it.
Seth Research Laboratories in California have recently demonstrated that in some tumors, cancer cells are killed by marijuana, while other healthy cells are left untouched. Cells that stop moving and become still white dots are dead cancer cells. The ability of cannabinoids to kill bad cells while protecting healthy ones is particularly important when we're talking about brain cancer because of the so-called blood-brain barrier. The brain has to be sheltered from outside influences that might hitch a ride on the bloodstream and cause havoc. What is exciting and unique about cannabinoids is that they can pass through the blood-brain barrier because of their slippery, fat-loving nature. Cannabinoids get right into the brain's cancer cells by moving easily through the cell's membranes, which are also composed of lipids.
Probably one of the most fascinating cases is a gentleman with the glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor. Very deadly tumor. This tumor, from diagnosis, untreated, the average survival is just 3 months. Fully treated with radiation, surgery, and chemotherapy is about 12 months. So this gentleman is a middle-aged man who began using cannabis at the time of his diagnosis. He's been very consistent in using cannabis on a daily, multiple-time daily basis, now for 7 years without any signs of recurrence.
The evidence is piling up in mice-infested labs that the cannabinoid system, when stimulated by cannabis, has an anti-tumor effect and can instruct cancer cells to commit suicide.
This was done by Manuel Guzman's group within the past less than 10 years, and what they showed there was that originally that THC, when injected into a brain tumor in mice and rats, a significant number of those animals the tumor would regress and disappear, so that you actually had survival of rats that would otherwise die. And they examined all the surrounding nerve tissue, and that was all fine, because remember, once again, cannabinoids protect nerves.
Manuel Guzman is a professor of biochemistry at the University of Madrid, Spain. He is known all over the world for his research on medical cannabis.
Sí que hemos observado que los cannabinoides tienen un efecto inductor de la muerte de las células tumorales, un efecto inhibidor de lo que es el crecimiento, la multiplicación de las células tumorales. Lo que hacen es disminuir el crecimiento de los tumores.
Dozens of major studies have been published in recent years that indicate that the chemicals in cannabis, in the lab and in animals, have a significant effect on fighting almost all major cancers, including brain, breast, prostate, lung, skin, colon, and leukemia cancers. They do this by promoting the death of cancer cells that have forgotten how to die, as well as a reduction in their crucial blood supply while leaving healthy cells untouched. Despite this, the pharmaceutical industry seems little interested in the enormous therapeutic potential of marijuana.
Modern medicine, under the pharmaceutical-based paradigm, has been looking for targeted therapies. So instead of looking for a medicine that can treat nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, depression, pain, anxiety, we look for something that can block, this enzyme inside the cell's membrane. And so that's, what we're taught is medicine. The other things are considered snake oil. Anything that can do that many things that effectively makes people a little bit leery.
Rather than studying naturally occurring compounds on a large scale, pharmaceutical companies prefer to try and isolate their single chemical compounds in order to create drugs of rapid commercial success.
The holy grail for the pharmaceutical industry, and really for the federal government too, is to find the next billion-dollar pharmaceutical, the next billion-dollar drug. And the pharmaceutical industry now knows that these drugs are going to be cannabinoids.
In 2006, researchers from Sanofi Aventis tried to exploit the cannabinoids mechanism to create a pill for weight loss. Since the use of marijuana increases appetite, they reasoned, by blocking the appropriate receptors, the opposite effect should be obtained. The drug they developed, Rimonabant, did indeed reduce the appetite by blocking the endocannabinoid receptors. But data from clinical studies showed that Rimonabant users also suffered from depression, anxiety, insomnia, and aggressive impulses at twice the rate of subjects given a placebo. In one study, there were 5 suicides among Rimonabant users, because as they later discovered, cannabinoids are also mood regulators, with the capacity to make us feel euphoric or, when blocked, depressed. Rimonabant was finally withdrawn from the market in 2008. GW Pharmaceuticals, a company that specializes in the study and commercialization of cannabinoids, has already established a full-cycle facility in an undisclosed location in the south of England, where they oversee the cultivation of the plant right up to the finished medical product. This facility grows from 30 to 60,000 plants a year. Once the marijuana is ready for processing, it undergoes the same exact treatment for extraction and refinement that is forbidden to regular citizens around the world.
Amazingly, GW Pharmaceuticals, who is this company that has 6 greenhouses in a secret location in the south of England, and each greenhouse has a different strain of marijuana in it. Each greenhouse has 10,000 plants in it. Each of the plants is a clone of the other. So they've standardized this stuff. Now, their product was approved for sale in Canada for treatment of multiple sclerosis, the muscle spasm and the pain related to that.
And this is a spray?
This is an under-the-tongue spray. And the reason they went with the spray was they felt that they would have a hard time getting by the regulators if they had people smoke it.
One of the biggest paradoxes was created in the late 1980s when Roxanne Pharmaceuticals marketed a pill called Marinol.
How about the pill form that's legalized already?
The pill form is legal for 2 or 3 things. Nausea and vomiting of chemotherapy, AIDS wasting, and also for certain kinds of neuropathic pain.
Marinol is plain synthetic THC. In other words, the basic molecule of the pill is identical to the THC in marijuana.
Marinol is pure synthetic THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and Marinol is a prescription item.
Absurdity has come full circle. Since cannabis was originally prohibited because of the psychotropic effects of THC, and now the same THC can be legally produced and sold by a pharmaceutical company. Aware of this contradiction, the DEA has tried to justify the marketing of Marinol by saying that the true reason for marijuana to remain prohibited is the damage caused by smoking it. In the meantime, however, no government agency has ever suggested prohibiting cigars and cigarettes. Furthermore, it is known that many patients using medicinal marijuana do not smoke it, but inhale it through a special vaporizer. By doing so, they can get the most out of the chemical compounds of the plant without having to expose themselves to the negative effects of burning the plant. But the hypocrisy of marijuana prohibition doesn't end there. While the plant still remains locked in the infamous Schedule 1 next to drugs with no known therapeutic effects, the efficacy of marijuana against cancer was apparently known to the American government more than 30 years ago. In a 1975 Medical College of Virginia study led by Dr. Albert Munson, they discovered that THC slowed the growth of 3 kinds of cancer: lung, breast, and virus-induced leukemia. The Virginia study was immediately shut down, and all further cannabis tumor research was abandoned.
The number of times that all of the available literature on marijuana's safety and effectiveness has been reviewed by august government-appointed clinical bodies and have come back with the same conclusion, that it's safe and it's, useful, and that information gets ignored.
The problem remains, though, that nobody in Congress wants to be labeled soft on drugs. But as the states begin to legalize or continue to legalize the medicinal use of cannabis, I believe there will be a tipping point where the nation will be ready to change the law and allow people their right to use cannabis freely.